colonialists left Uganda in 1962. However, Ugandan leaders continued with the draconian press order that colonialists left behind.
If you wrote correct things and you did not attack the colonial authority, you were free to do so. But if you attacked the colonialists the wrong way, you got in problems.
2 months to independence, on the 9th of October 1962, Milton Obote, soon to be the executive prime minister, addressed his party's delegates at a conference, saying among other things that every human being is free to seek the truth and express the truth as may understand it. But what he did not make clear is that there were serious limits to expression of truth in his government.
You talk anything, you bring anything, you are arrested on the airport with it, if at all you come.
So in 1966, the government threw out Billy Chiba, a Daily Nation reporter, and also banned Sekanyolia that loudly championed Buganda's interests.
When the palace at Mengo was stormed by the troops of the Uganda government, Kabaka himself fled. His government was dismantled. The Ruchik also was dismantled. So Sekanyolia could hardly stand alone there.
When Army Chief Idi Amin overthrew Milton Obote in January 1971, he cited lack of freedom to air views and promised that he would have to change. But within a year, the killing of journalists had started.
Jewish woman who was killed, the Muno wrote an article criticizing that situation. But Kigun, who was a very good journalist, and I used to work with him very closely, the photographer, they were taken and they were killed in Namambe.
The newspaper business, as we all know it at the time, died.
The newspapers were always small and came and went.
In 1979, Tanzanian forces fighting alongside Ugandan exiles overthrew Idi Amin and the press revived itself. After nearly 2 years of political chaos, Milton Obote returned to power to run a government company referred to as Obote One. His government banned 7 newspapers and also banned the influential weekly Topic.
Of course, there was the rigged elections, and we of Weekend Topic, where they were supposed to be against, we were for UPM, we were banned together with other small newspapers.
President Yoweri Museveni's triumphant National Resistance Army guerrillas captured power in January 1986. The Museveni government was better than its predecessors, but only just. From March 1986 to 1992, the government dragged before the courts at least a journalist a year. That record has remained virtually unchanged to date. Sedition and criminal defamation were often cited offenses.
So I don't think that Mwenda could be accused of not doing research. I don't think that Daniel Kalinaki can be accused of not doing research. I don't think Henry Ocheng or Nyango Bob before them and so many others. I think they can be accused of having tackled subjects which were considered taboo.
The broadcast media in Uganda was liberalized in 1993, and the freeing up of the airwaves saw the coming up of several radio and TV stations. The question of whether this is termed as press freedom calls for debate.
In terms of universal standards of expression, Uganda still has a long way to go.
In my 9 years experience in journalism, I can't see press freedom.
Journalists are harassed here and there when they write against the authority. But taking it generally, Uganda is enjoying a much higher freedom of the press.
Advertisers are a very big threat to freedom of expression, especially big advertisers. They are very often, threatening and intimidating media houses not to, publish stories that are critical of their businesses, their operations, and all that.
You are now actually questioning the degree of freedom, but not freedom itself.
The bigger challenge is not the freedom to say what you want, but the freedom to say something new and intelligent.
However, this country risks damaging its good standing on media freedoms because of the Draft Press and Journalists Amendment Bill 2010 that contained some backward-looking clauses.
The question of the independence of the Media Council. Then the other problem is they had proposed several offenses, including one about, I think, endangering national security, inciting violence, endangering Uganda's relations with her neighbors and so on, and economic sabotage.
The 2006 pre-general election period presented enormous challenges to press freedom and to journalists in Uganda too.
The increasing discomfort of the government with political opposition and dissent, the media being a very key institution in terms of that expression, have been a target of attack by officialdom.
Francis Timwekwashize is one of the journalists who have tested the alleged police brutality at all fronts during his career. His ordeal is just a representation of the many who can't speak out.
I was hit on the knee, on the left leg. I sustained a big injury, wound, and my colleagues was beaten up by dogs.
During the standoff between the Uganda government and the central government in 2009 Kayunga riots, lives were lost. Several radio stations were closed, while television stations were barred from broadcasting the live riots in Kampala. Some TV presenters lost their jobs on government directive.
We have laws. We are not necessarily comfortable with those laws, but they are still laws. And nowhere do they talk about the employees or journalists or talk show hosts having to bid to play to the government's, liking for them to be able to hold their jobs.
Another challenge was the 2011 post-general elections demonstrations by the opposition. Many journalists were beaten and had their equipment confiscated for broadcasting police brutality imposed on the opposition leaders and other protesters.
The uproar, the outrage against the opposition have been largely because the media were able to capture these actions and share them, not just with Ugandans, but with the whole world.
Some years ago, Museveni's confidence was so high that he looked at what he thought gratuitous criticism in the media with scorn. These days, he seems much more sensitive to it. So I think that history and time has just made the government that he leads touchy about things which they wouldn't have bothered about 10, 15 years ago.
Historically, all governments in Uganda have attempted to maintain some sort of control over the press. Successive leaders have since then said one good thing about free speech and democracy, but continue to do quite the very opposite. Despite pressures for reform, they have kept most of the regulations to pursue their vested political interests.